good afternoon. Uh, Thank you for the welcome. And the privilege is all mine. The honor is all mine. I'm glad to be here speaking at this prestigious Royal Global University here in Guwahati. I've been traversing through Guwahati when I travel to Arunachal Pradesh or to Shillong or to Dimapur, where we have some number of Tibetans there, but never stopped in Guwahati to speak with the universities or to interact with the public. So this is my first occasion, and I want to thank the university authorities for organizing this. In fact, I have also been doing quite a number of university rounds, starting from Oxford in UK, with some more universities in the UK, and my last engagement was at Harvard, where Madam had served before at the Harvard JFK Junior Forum in the Institute of Politics. We have only one Tibetan undergrad there who was responsible for working with other student union leaders to organize that event. So these are the engagements that we try to, go around the world and talk to people about China, about Tibet, and the intention of the Chinese government. Even in India, there are not many scholars on China, very few scholars on China. And when you are dealing with the government, particularly as a neighbor so close to you, it is very important that we understand the geopolitics of what is happening around us. I'm born in India. So in that sense, I'm an Indian. I call myself a Kannadiga because I can speak little Kannada and speak little Tamil because I grew up in the south. I've never seen my land, Tibet. So to fulfill my emotional needs, I travel from Arunachal Pradesh to Ladakh, where we have smaller Tibetan communities. We have to look after their welfare as well as for my emotional needs to see Tibet from the Indian side. So that is also one purpose of why I go on the Himalayas as often as I can. And to speak about Tibet, I have traveled to at least 27, 28 different countries so far in the last 4.5 years, and also keep learning every single day, keep reading every single day on what's happening around the world, globally, and the changing dynamics of global political situation, what China is doing with all the multilateral forums around the world, what is happening inside China, what Chinese are doing for Tibetans or against the Tibetans or the Uyghurs or the Mongols that are occupied by China. But to get a better understanding of Tibet, even though Tibet lies not very far from Assam, and the Tibetan river, the Yalung Tsangpo, flows into your state as Brahmaputra or Sikyong. There are not many Tibet. I would not think that there would be too many Assamese who study Tibet or the geopolitics of where Tibet is involved. And in fact, it is normally the norm when I travel to South America. They are focused more on the region, the Western Hemisphere, the North Americas and the South Americas. They hardly know much about Europe and less about Asia. So it's very important for us to travel around and tell the world what China is doing. And sometimes I don't know how much you study China. Some countries regard China as a monolith, a big power that cannot be disrupted. It's not like that. China also has a lot of soft underbellies. Right now, you must have read about the housing collapse, which constitutes about 25 to 30% of China's GDP. It's not a small amount, it's a huge amount. You're talking about a 19 trillion economy. The first is United States with 30 trillion, and the second is China. And India is just about $5 trillion economy. So it's a huge economy, and when you have a failed housing initiative, closing down all these big companies, that speaks for China's economy. Now China has stopped even subsidizing this, and there are also local government debts. Local governments are going bankrupt because earlier they make money by selling land, and the buildings were costly. Now building prices have gone down, land prices has gone down,
and the local governments are not able to make as much money as they used to before. But the central government is not relieving them. They did give a stimulus of 1.1 trillion yuan, which is nothing. They need at least 8 trillion yuan to lift the local governments out of bankruptcy. They also have those problems. Then there's this huge unemployment problem. We're talking about 18 to 20% of young Chinese being unemployed, and that number comes to about 12 to 12.5 million young Chinese who are unemployed. Then also because of the tariff war, there are more unemployment coming up. Every year you have new graduates of 11 to 12 million Chinese that has to be given jobs. But because of the one child policy that went on for too long, Chinese youngsters have lost value. Now the government is encouraging people to have more children, but young Chinese don't want to have children. They lost their moral compass. There is a huge vacuum of spirituality. So they keep saying, oh, you get married, you produce one child, so whatever your earnings are, you have to spend on that child. Why do you need to spend that much on a child? And there is these concepts like lie flat, where young people don't do anything, not work. So there are a lot of problems. Aging population. According to some estimates, in the next 50 years, 100 years, China's population can go down by half. So there are so many problems in China which are not explicitly visible to us because China's economy is export-oriented. If you look at the numbers, the domestic consumption is not increasing at all because they have seen their income go down during the 3 years of lockdown and then the government being able to make U-turn decisions. And now China is the only country that has a deflationary trend. Every other country has inflationary trend. There is so much deflation because of overcapacity and fight over prices, competition. That also has a cyclical impact on the economy because people will be earning less and they won't have that much money to spend. The China's domestic consumption is only about 40 to 45% compared to 60, 70% of the developing world. So China has to depend on exports. Now that the United States puts up these tariffs, they need more markets to sell their overcapacity. You have these electric vehicles which they produce in millions. So United States have put up tariff of 100%, Canada has put up 100%, European Union has put 34.5%, Brazil has, but now their EV markets are mainly Thailand and Brazil outside the developed countries. So China is looking at global south as a market, but again the question is how much purchasing power does the global south have? And if you listen to the Southeast Asian foreign ministers, finance ministers, or in Europe, they are already seeing increase of 20 to 30% imports from China since United States introduced tariff on China. And this is causing big problems for these upcoming countries, the developing countries, because all their small and medium-scale industries will be killed by Chinese products. I was in Mexico. Mexico buys in only about 15, 20 billion. And they sell only 15, 20 billion to China and buy 130 billion from China. And I mentioned about 300 billion plus trade deficit of United States with China. The 27 EU countries have 400 billion. You add up all this, goes to more than $1 trillion worth of foreign exchange reserve for China, because of which they splurge it on space technology, they splurge it on military, on artificial intelligence, on robotics, on dual-use technology that sustains the war in Ukraine, and the Belt and Road initiatives. There's a new study by an aid data company, an institution in the United States about Chinese investments outside. Everybody thought that China is investing in the developing countries in the global south. But they found that that's not the case. Only about 43% of the investment went to global south, including the Belt and Road initiative. But more than 50% of their investments are still in developed countries. So you have to understand China's moves everywhere. Because of China's hegemonic ambitions, Japan has to spend more now. Japan is from Shinzo Abe's time, they changed their policy from a pacifist to now to having to defend their country and spend more money on defense. Australia, New Zealand were the playgrounds for China. They first experimented in Australia and New Zealand how to influence the Western world because they are Western world, they are Western democracies, but they are physically way off from the other Western countries. So when I visited New Zealand, nobody was willing to speak about China, because all the intellectuals, business people, financials, everybody's fingers and toes are with China. Now they realize that China is becoming a security threat for New Zealand, because they are hacking into the parliament website and all that. So the Five Eyes are coming together to monitor China's hacking and indulgence in their countries. Australia, for the first time, is spending about $376 million to buy 7 nuclear submarines to defend against whom? China. Philippines have this perennial problem with China over the Scarborough Shoals. And then the other countries, Indonesia, Malaysia, Brunei, Vietnam, they all have problems with the Spratlys and the Parasol Islands, with China drawing up these 9 dash lines, which defines all the coastal areas also part of China. So this is creating a lot of problems. You look at India. A few years back, India never spent so much money on developing the border areas. Now, if you go from Arunachal Pradesh to Ladakh, you can see how much money Indian government is putting in to protect the Himalayas. So it's all because of China's hegemonic ambitions. And through Belt and Road Initiative, when China is not able to pay back the loan, then they take over strategic areas. We have already seen the Sihanoukville port, a part of Sihanoukville port taken over by the Chinese, because the Cambodian government is not able to pay back the loans. They have already taken over the Coco Islands in Burma. Now you try to understand what China is trying to do within Burma, between the juntas and the rebel army, to play with the rare earth and other income systems. Payment systems are also now coming under the radar of Chinese government. That's also the reason why you don't have a solution in Burma right now, because everybody is dependent on China to continue with their agenda. So, and then again in Sri Lanka, I'm sure you all must have read about all this, because China built the port and the seaport, promising that there would be a lot of business through the maritime Silk Road. For South Indians, security was never an issue, because security always used to be concerned in the Himalayas or with Pakistan. Today, maritime security is a big issue, because China is sending a lot of ships to monitor the undersea cables and the telecommunications that are happening under the sea. So it is a huge concern even for South Indians now. And having taken over the Hambantota port by the Chinese authorities just because Sri Lanka is not able to pay back the loans is a huge security risk for India. And we have seen the developments in Maldives with President Muji coming in and trying to, crank up the relationship with China. Now I think they realize better. If you consider India as a frying pan, then when you deal with China, you are jumping into the fire cauldron. And China's influence in the Pacific Islands of Solomon and all those Marshall Islands, and now China having taken over the Gwadar port in Pakistan, in Balochistan, south of Pakistan, that also imperils the other project, the China Economic Pakistan Corridor, CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Just last week, I heard a Pakistani minister saying that the CPEC is not helping Pakistanis at all. And this is coming from a Pakistani politician. That gives access for China over the whole of Arabian Sea through the Gwadar port and connecting Gwadar with mainland China through Xinjiang. And then China's relationship with Iran. China having taken over part of the Djibouti port, which could also be an army base for China if there has to be a war in the Middle East. And you look at all the stuff in the African countries also, where China has invested in infrastructure, telecommunication, ports, all that. Now the African countries realize that they are not able to pay back the loans. So last year, 20 representatives from 20 African countries went to China to rework on their loan repayment. And same things are happening in Latin America. So China's arms are increasing, their tentacles are everywhere, and we should not take China's words for lightly, because at one time during Deng Xiaoping's time, you should hide your strength. Even if you are strong, don't show you are strong. Now, right now, under Xi Jinping, they are becoming brazen. Look at the developments with Japan over the last 1 or 2 weeks. A consul officer, consul general in Osaka is able to say that the head of the prime minister of Japan needs to be cut off because she made a statement on Taiwan. How brazen can you be? Diplomats are not supposed to say these dirty words. They are supposed to increase and improve relations between countries. And that is backed by the Chinese government and the Chinese official mouthpieces like Global Times and China Youth Daily and all the things that they came out in support with the diplomat who did this. So China's wolf warriors seem to be coming back. So if you look at all the things that China is doing, then we get a better idea of how much we need to deal with China. My concern is, some of our friends in Europe say, oh, the dragon is biting at us, dragon meaning China. And I keep telling them, dragon at one time was very weak. It was not in any position to bite anybody. But it's all of us, the Americans, the Europeans, Taiwanese, Japanese, who are all responsible for making China big today because of their investment. That's why I keep saying you don't have to read too many books, just read one book, Kissinger on China, as to how much America helped China for what it is today. Now, knowing that the dragon is biting at you, if you still keep feeding the dragon, then whose fault is it? And China will respect only strength, not weakness. If democratic countries are not able to stand up for their values, then China will never respect you. I also tell our friends, right now you are on your two legs. The more China asks you to kowtow, bend your body, kowtow, you will be on your fours. You will become a donkey. Then China will keep riding you because that's how China functions. China, when it comes to the United States, the United States is not treating us equal. But when China is dealing with India, do you think China is treating India as an equal? Not at all. So they have two standards all the time. In the functioning of the government also, you have the Communist Party apparatus, then you have the People's Congresses. The final authority lies with the Communist Party. Since Xi Jinping came into power, the government departments are just namesake. It's the commissions behind every government body that decides, that takes the major decisions. Within China, also on domestic issues, it's the Communist Party that decides everything, not the governmental organs. So you also have political commissars. If you watch China's politics over a longer period of time, then you will get this sense that there are bigger, there are symptoms of a bigger malaise that is happening. Because just last month, 2 months ago, they removed 9 generals. The second highest general, He Weidong, and the political commissar, Mei Hua, they were removed, along with 7 other generals. One is responsible for East China, one is responsible for South China. So that's why sometimes I get asked questions, do you think China will attack Taiwan now? I say China is not ready yet, because they have a lot of troubles. The people in the rocket forces who are responsible for missile technologies, who were appointed by President Xi Jinping himself, are being removed by him. Whether it's being done by him or is he being coerced by other leaders to do this, we don't know. We are still trying to find out because the system is so opaque. But the paranoia is so much that within the 7 members of the Politburo, not 2 members have dinner together. Above the rank of deputy minister in China, you are talking about 1,000-strong leadership. Not more than 3 leaders can meet together without the permission of the president. Because if something happens to the government tomorrow, they could be accused of doing something behind the scenes. Now I understand that even in Tibet, at the mid-level staff also, not more than 3 can meet together. That's a level of paranoia. In the army also, it has gone back to the mindsets of Mao's time. Today, if a Chinese army wants to get married, his or her spouse has to be vetted by the government. That's how much fearful they are of who is going to dethrone them. So we have to watch everything what China is doing in APEC, AP4, in SAC, No, SAARC is no more as valid as it used to be. You have the ASEAN, ASEAN Plus, you have the SCO nations, you have the BRICS, you have the G20. So we watch what China is doing in all these multilateral forums, including the United Nations. When US backtracks, then China steps in. And they define human rights from the perspective how they want it to be understood. Now China is not talking only about domestic issues. They are talking about a global security initiative, global civilizational initiative, global cultural initiatives. Just last month, in September, China came out with a global governance initiative. If that is the case, if China wants to export its system of governance to the rest of the world, would India like to be an authoritarian state? No. But they have these ambitions. We cannot take it lightly because they always come with a plan. Despite all the troubles they have, they're still trying to assert its influence in the region, which is not very good for all our neighbors. They speak about harmony, but they do something else. So I will end here. Of course, there's a lot of things to I can speak for hours and hours on global politics, on geostrategic, geoeconomic issues, but I think within this limited time, I want to thank the authorities here, the registrars. I understand that the Vice Chancellor and the Chancellor are not in town. But again, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity and to focus on nonviolence. I keep telling the Americans, nonviolence comes in millions. Violence comes in billions. So you have to choose which one you want to do. And if there has to be true solutions for global conflicts or regional conflicts, it has to be done through the non-violent means. His Holiness appreciates the concept of European Union. And if that can be applied to European Union, then why not to Tibet with China? We don't have a Hanuman to lift Tibet out of that place and put it somewhere in the Bay of Bengal. So whenever we get to go back to Tibet, we'll have to live with Chinese as neighbors. We'll have to live with Nepalese, Bhutanese, and Indians as neighbors. Then if we have to live as neighbors, then why don't we live in peace with each other? Why do we have to keep fighting with each other as neighbors? That makes no sense. So I'll stop here, but we will never give up. We will never give up. Even if we are only 130, 40,000 in exile, even if His Holiness is now has reached 90 years of age, he has enabled us to carry forward the movement, and we will continue to carry forward the movement. The only thing is we need a little more understanding from the global community, particularly from India. That is why I'm reaching out to the younger generation who are the leaders of tomorrow. Because the older generation knows a little bit about Tibet, but there's not much that they can do. Now it is in your hands how you shape your country in future, and it's very important for you to understand the geopolitics and understand your neighbors. That is why I came here to speak for Tibet and also to speak for you. Thank you very much.
Maybe take a few questions.